Hello, this is lesson 2 of week 5. In this lesson, we are going to look at the float, the clear, and the overflow CSS properties. In the last lesson, we inserted an image on the page, and we also inserted some text below the image. We want to see how to put the image on a particular position on the page and allow the text flow around the image like we have in articles and newspapers. And to do this, we need a property called the float property in CSS. Now for this demo, I'm going to change the image displayed on the page to a smaller image so that we can properly demonstrate the float property. So I'm going to use car3.jpg. Always know the file extension of the image you are inserting on the page. I will save this. I will refresh my page to see my new car image inserted on the page. Now this is a small image, so we can demonstrate the float property better. I want this text to start beside this image instead of beneath the image. In CSS, we specify a property called float, and we put a value of left, right, none, or inherit. If I want this image on the right of the page and I want the text to float around the left and cover the page, so I'm going to increase the text on the page so that we have a longer text and we can demonstrate this better. Okay, I'll save, refresh, and see how much text I have. And I have my text floating around the image and the image on the right. If I specify float to be left, I'll have my image on the left and the text will float around the image. And this is what we want. Now remember that sometimes you want a space between the image and the text. And the text, we are going to get to that later on. But for now, we can see that the text is floated around the image and the image is on the left. We can specify another image on this page. And let me put the car4.jpg image. I want to have this image on the page, but note that my style is on the image tag, so the same style will affect both images. I want to change my style to use the ID selector, so I'm going to put an ID attribute here, and I'll put this as let's say right, and I'll put the other as left. So you give your ID any name, the value of your ID attribute, and you make sure that your style has that name, left. So I'm going to change my style for image 1 to use an ID selector of left, and then I'm going to create another style to use an ID selector of right. Now these names are any name you want. Left and right are not the names, they are the names I have given to my style. The first image is floated left. We want to insert the second image on the page. I will refresh my page. You'll see the effect before I tell you what the next property is to clear that effect. So I'll refresh my page. We have another image on the page, and then the text is below the image. But we might want this text to also float around this image. If I say I want the text to be left, the image to be left, and the text to float around it like the first one, we are going to have a display problem on the page because the first element is floated left. We are floating the second element left. Now the effect of the problem is not seen because this text goes underneath the image. In the event that we reduce the text on this page like this, then we are going to see the problem of floating both elements left because this starts where the image is. There's a CSS property called clear that we use to decide what happens to the next element after a floated element. When I want to float left, again since the first one is left. There is a clear property that I must use. The clear must match the first float. So if I floated left on the first image, I have to clear left for the next element. If I floated right, I will clear right. So I'll clear left before I float left. And when I refresh, I will see that it is better. The second image is better. But we can still style this such that we can display this properly. And the images will align better, or there will be a margin or a padding around the images. So we can go to this and actually put a margin around the images, and I'll put a margin of 10 px, and I'll also put a margin here. Save, refresh, and then we'll have spaces around the image and the text. So you can play around with the styles and see how we can float the different images on different parts of a page. So I want to float this right. Refresh. I have the image on the right and the text floating around the image. So there are various ways you can style images on the left or the right of the page. There is another thing that can happen when you have images on a page. Let's say, for instance, we have a container on the page. I'll create a style for a div tag, and I'm going to wrap the image around the container. Let's say this container has a width of 200 pixels. It has a height of, let's say, 70 pixels. Then we'll save this and we'll wrap this text and this image in that div tag. So let's try this. Let me wrap just the text in a div tag. Let's illustrate this using the text. So instead of P here, I will have div, and I will have div. I'll save this. Let's refresh and see if we get. Okay. So now we have this text in a container. We can't see the container properly, so let me put a border for this so that we can see the boundaries of the container. So border, I want it to be 2px, and I want it to be solid so we can see the border. So this is the container up there. It is 2px, it is solid. The text is larger than that container, and you can see that the container is behind the image and the text. There is a property called the overflow property in CSS. When you specify the overflow property, you can put a value of hidden, which is going to clip the element so that only the parts of the content of the element that can fit into that container will be displayed, and the rest will be clipped away. So we can try hidden and see how it displays. So the text is there up to the point where the container can take, and then the rest is clipped away. So that is what the hidden effect is. We have another value that we can use, and it is called the visible. This is the default value. So when you don't specify the overflow, it is visible, and you're going to see exactly what we saw at the beginning where the text overflows the container. You can specify scroll and tell the container to contain all of it, but add a scroll bar so that the users can scroll top to bottom to see all of the content like this. So we have a scroll bar here. Or you can specify auto which acts like the scroll, but it doesn't add the scroll bar except it is necessary. So auto and scroll are the same. Auto, you use it when you want scroll bars to appear, but you want it to appear only when necessary. You use scroll when you want the scroll bar to be present on the page. So this is how we use the overflow property. And in the case of images, sometimes you want to always set the overflow to auto. So if you have an image in a container, you want to set overflow to auto. So these are the CSS properties that we are going to use around images. In the next lesson, we are going to look at more image display